So in my hand right now, I'm holding 100 million pounds. At least that's what Muller just paid to acquire the company who produced this delicious and tasty beverage, Biotiful. So I'm going to break down Biotiful's playbook, how they essentially were living in the future, which allowed them to spot the big trend at the time and help them scale very quickly. How they planned to perfection, when was the right moment to actually make big wholesale changes to their business model, and how they masterfully crafted stories that catapulted them to being one of the UK's largest health and wellness brands. This story, however, probably has a much earlier starting point than you ever realized. So there is evidence that dates the earliest kefir consumption to around 4,000 years ago in ancient China. However, most of the literature focuses on a period 2,000 years ago in the Caucasus region, sort of the strip of land that connects Eastern Europe and Western Asia, sort of modern-day Georgia. Now, how and where kefir actually came from, who made it, that itself is shrouded in legend, and no one quite knows exactly where. But there's countless stories, and one of them, for example, says that the Prophet Muhammad actually gifted the kefir grains, which is used to ferment milk and turn it into kefir, gifted it to the nomadic people of the mountain, showed them how to brew it, showed them how to make it, and actually create this fortified substance, which at the time only added to the magic and allure of kefir, and there's probably a reason as to why it was heavily guarded as a family secret or a tribal secret and not really passed around or spread throughout the region for a long period of time. However, we do know that kefir was fermented in animal skin bags, and in my opinion, I believe that its discovery was more in line with the behavioral and societal attitudes of the time, in that food, and more importantly, food preservation, was critical for human survival. So you can imagine it, someone has found the kefir grains in an old container of milk and experimented with it, just like every other invention has been created in the world. And from there, they managed to turn milk into the kefir substance that we know today. At which point it was then passed down through generation and generation until it made its way into Eastern Europe, which is where the founder of Biotiful, Natasha Bowles, first came into contact with it. You see, when Natasha would have first tried kefir, at that point in time, it was already a staple within Eastern European diets. Not much was known about it other than it cured gut illnesses, it boosted immunity, it gave the consumer energy, kept them full, kept them strong, which for Natasha, who also competed in Russia in figure skating, that would have helped her immensely as she tackled and recovered from grueling sessions on the ice. But there's one clear issue. Biotiful was a startup making kefir in the UK. When compared Eastern Europe to the UK at the time, the UK didn't know a thing about what kefir is. So when Natasha first launched Biotiful in 2012, she had a huge problem on her hands. Kefir was widespread all over Eastern Europe. I mean, you can go to any supermarket, any grocer, find it in multiple different flavors, multiple different variations of the original product. I mean, it was absolutely everywhere. And this actually makes a lot of sense when you look into Soviet and then Russian views on healthcare versus Western-held beliefs and views. I mean, if you really had to sum it up, it boils down to a preventative first view on healthcare versus treatment-focused. Compare the left to the right, East versus West, you start to understand that Eastern European governance views healthcare and the health of its citizens as the responsibility of the state. So in turn, it's less costly for the state if they focus on keeping the people physically fit and ensure that they have strong immune systems. This is where kefir being mass campaigned all across Russia as a food source that promotes longevity, energy, and immunity comes in. The opposite of that is people only need to seek treatment and medicine after they fall ill. So here in the Western view, it's up to the individual to make the correct choices and the correct lifestyle decisions to stay healthy, and to only seek professionals and pharmaceuticals when necessary. The idea of preventative healthcare in the West, it existed, it just wasn't the preference. And what was deemed healthy or not pretty much was decided by whichever party was in power at the time, and without speculating too much, could easily have been influenced by big pharmaceutical and big food corporations under the guise of moving products or increasing shares. Tinfoil hat and all of that. I'm just saying, could be possible. They're lying to you, bro. Back to the lesson here. We list out all the major food trends prior to 2012. From the 50s to 60s, someone's health was determined by their physical weight and appearance, essentially calories in versus calories out. This, of course, is a great visual indicator and is generally a pretty good indicator of someone's health. However, it's extremely limited in that the complexity of health and nutrition, as we now know, is much more than just skin deep. Between the 80s and 90s, there was this huge shift. The message was clear. Fat is public enemy number one. Fat was massively demonized as extremely harmful to heart health and linked to a leading cause for obesity. And this gave rise to huge amounts of low-fat products flooding the market. Which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with low-fat options, but completely demonizing fat, even though there's clear evidence that points to its role in metabolic function, amongst other things. And also, the fact that to produce these low-fat options, you're increasing the amount of sugar in the products, but not a word has been said about it. Maybe my theory is not so bold. The 90s, the vitamin and supplement boom. This is the first time where we see preventative healthcare being pushed more in Western society through the forms of gaining your nutrients through vitamin A, vitamin C, magnesium, calcium tablets, whatever it is. But the choice is still with the consumer. But now, governments and scientists, they have enough data to suggest that, for example, you should be consuming more vitamin C in order to keep your immune system functioning and fight colds. And then finally, in the 2000s, only then did we first see the first few functional foods hit UK supermarkets with products like Actimel and Yakult. But why products such as these were specifically good for you, it was still extremely unclear. In fact, I distinctly remember being told as a child the reason why Actimel was so good for you is because it was good for your tummy. That's what my parents told me. That's how it was advertised as. It's a similar sort of narrative for why milk was good for you, It's good for your bones and it makes you grow tall and strong. But there's no real reason as to why that actually is. The point is, this is what Natasha and Biotiful had to overcome. And we're talking generationally held views on what health is, societal held views on what health is and what defines health in humans. And, my parents and teachers, they could only teach me what they were told by their parents and teachers. And then their parents and teachers could only be taught by what their parents and teachers told them, and so on and so forth. So this is decades and decades of constantly changing views on health and trends and new innovations and new foods popping up and new narratives always being spun. Not to also mention, in my opinion, a cultural and Western view that they had to overcome, in that the idea and concept of fermented milk or spoilt milk probably was quite repulsive to some people. The view had been held for almost 100 years at that point that all milk, all dairy had to be pasteurized, and that any unpasteurized milk was unclean and dirty and teeming with bacteria. So Natasha had to take on the challenge of educating the British public. But there's just one big problem. Biotiful's marketing budget was tiny, and had to resource one person, Natasha herself. This meant she couldn't do a hit and hope job. She couldn't just be blasting out different marketing campaigns, hoping one lands. No, the game plan here was about efficiency, and Biotiful's execution was textbook. This is the first major lesson that we can actually borrow from Biotiful, especially when you're at the start, when there's so many unknowns, and even more so when you're working with low budget, low working capital. It means you have to be hyper-focused on who and what your service is actually being targeted for. This means creating one service, one product for one person, and then messaging and marketing that to that specific one person. Doing this is all about creating marketing efficiency, using your marketing budget as efficient as possible. I mean, this is what Biotiful did. They proved product market fit and adoption of kefir before even thinking or contemplating scaling. And then in addition to that, It allowed them to put education top of funnel first, which when you actually combine that with a long-term vision and a long-term plan, which for Biotiful was to reset the nation's gut health. It meant Natasha had now figured out a way and had a plan in place of how she was going to tell everyone about just how good kefir was. If you break it down into 2 phases, you can really start to appreciate this. It was a perfectly executed game plan that required setting up all the pieces just in the right spots, but then having the patience and long-term vision to make those big plays without ever straying away from the authenticity and the story that actually allowed you to set up all those pieces in the first place. So I've listed out all the attributes here as part of Biotiful's phase 1 marketing plan. Now, the first step of the dance, of course, has to be identifying who the product would best be marketed to. But rather than go for everyone at first, instead, the decision was made to position the product for women aged 30 to 55 with upper to middle income. This was a perfect product market match at the time. I mean, from a financial point of view, it makes complete sense because women within this income bracket would have much more disposable cash at hand and therefore would be more willing to spend on a new premium health product, which of course is extremely handy to sell in a new product. But also, women in this financial category exhibit other specific shopping behaviors, such as them being more likely to visit boutique and niche health stores in the first place. Another fact is that women were at the time, and actually still are, the major health decision maker in most family homes. Incredibly, 75 to 80% of household health related purchases are made by women. This is a fantastic social and family dynamic that Biotiful banked on in phase 1. The thing is, we can actually go deeper than the behavioral traits so far that we've listed out for our phase 1 target segment. This is why I love to observe how these massive companies grow, because there's so much depth to build in marketing campaigns and products when you have such a deep understanding of who you're targeting. You see, even physiologically, it's a match, because in a time where knowledge on gut health and the importance of maintaining gut health was extremely low, women were already more familiar with concepts of digestive issues versus men, being that around 14 to 24% of women are directly impacted by IBS versus just 5 to 19% of men. Then there's also the menstrual cycle. And we know that fluctuations in estrogen and progesterone at various stages of cycles can cause changes in gut motility and sensitivity, which itself is linked to bloating and constipation. So because of this, a hypothesis can be made that women would just be much more open in general to a product that will look after their gut health. You also have social characteristics that you can consider, in that women exhibit stronger information sharing behavioral traits than men, especially within their friendship circles, which is absolutely perfect for a new startup looking to get traction through word of mouth. In my opinion, the best marketing strategy with the biggest return. On a side note, I actually find this super interesting, by the way, because every time online you listen to someone speak and they're always talking about you must niche down. And all the reasons for why you should niche down. It's always very top level, trying to understand and dig into basic top level problems for your target demographic. But when you actually look into these companies and you learn how they done it, you start to realize there's just so much more depth to it. We're talking psychological, physiological problems. There's a lot to actually consider when it comes to your actual target market. I find it fascinating. Anyway, back to the analysis. For phase 1, the goal here for Biotiful is simple: educate and build a loyal base of believers. Now they have a goal set and the target demographic detailed, they needed to get their premium product in front of their audience. So meeting them where they live, aka their distribution channels are Whole Food stores, wellness events, upscale farmers markets. Interestingly, Biotiful in phase 1 also managed to get their product into one premium grocer in the UK, which is Waitrose. Now, if you're not from the UK, Waitrose is one of those, it's probably one of the most upscale supermarkets. So really, it was a match made in heaven. In addition, and I'm not sure, by the way, if it's just unreal timing or strategically planning or luck or a bit of both, but between 2012 and 2015, there were massive, and I mean massive, breakthroughs in our understanding of human biology. This was huge, by the way, Because now all the traditional claims that Biotiful were making in their educational programs, it was now backed up by modern science. And it's really quite fascinating actually when you dive into it. You have projects such as the Human Microbiome Project, which fundamentally changed our knowledge and understanding of how the human microbiome works. In that study, they found that the human body is made up of trillions and trillions of these microbes, and that these microbes form patterns and clusters throughout the body, including the gut, and that when you actually sit and observe these patterns and clusters in a healthy human versus a non-healthy human, there is significant differences. And then from that, they started to connect all the dots and link all these different patterns to various health indicators, such as low diversity was actually linked to obesity, skin health, immunity, and digestive issues like chronic inflammatory bowel disease. Another study conducted by Emran Meyer for the first time proved a brain-gut axis that went on to link gut health to anxiety, mood, and cognitive function. So now gut health and the gut biome was now mainstream, and also something incredible happened that really ushered in phase 2 of Natasha's plan to just launch and take Biotiful to a completely different level. Off the back of all these insights, the trend of functional health completely blew up. All of a sudden, there was a rise in online influencers, all promoting various different healthy lifestyles that didn't just view health as physical fitness, but for the first time was well-rounded, included brain health and gut health. This was Biotiful's moment. This is the moment, this was their time to shine. All those years of building brand authority, building a cult core following was about to come to fruition. This is actually one of my favorite parts of the story. See, I personally am extremely passionate about health and wellness. And in my opinion, my perfect diet would really be to just eat single ingredient foods, really high quality foods, very natural, very minimally processed. And those views really stemmed from my exposure to the online world. You have all this information being shared for the first time about what healthy living could be like for you. You have different views on whether red meat actually is a superfood, if it's actually good for you. You have potential information on all the nutrition that we've been missing out from raw dairy. You have raw vegan, carnivore, whole food diets. More and more awareness constantly being generated about the dangers of ultra processed foods. The options really are just limitless. And all you really have to do is listen to the stories and experiences being shared by other people and just pick one that suits your own lifestyle. So as a wellness enthusiast, this was the perfect situation for me, which, as you can imagine, for Biotiful was absolutely perfect for them. Because with this new health craze, there was a shift in consumer preferences to natural ingredients, simplicity, functional foods that covered a multitude of different body functions, which, as you can imagine, you probably guessed it, had gut health front and center. As part of phase 2 for Biotiful's market expansion, I'd pretty much become their next target segment. The thing is, I'm not even joking, because when we actually reflect on Biotiful's phase 2 marketing and product strategy, now the gender split was much more balanced and the age range was a lot bigger. Education was no longer an issue because most of the literature around kefir and its benefits was starting to become common knowledge. Plus, anyone who didn't know about their brand through social media, a strong brand with a strong following could educate millions without Biotiful ever even having to spend a penny doing it themselves. It was time to expand, and the shift was now towards focusing on their products as a superior option over any other health food product. And to be honest, even just regular dairy products. So to address this, Biotiful's new target market to try and capture new fans, especially men, they changed up the messaging to focus now more on protein, athletic performance, and energy. They released the range of bigger size bottles, which work to treat and appealing to someone like me in their 20s, likes to eat clean, enjoys working out, and is seeking a natural, convenient, on-the-go source of protein that also has that added benefit of looking after my gut biome, which gives me both focus and clarity. The crazy thing is, this actually happened to me. So My first experience ever trying kefir as a product and Biotiful as a product was when I was away for work. Now, at this point in time, I was actually cutting down for a holiday I had coming up in what was then a couple months away. So I was trying to get lean, I was trying to get in shape because I already told you I was in the gym. I was training quite regularly, but I didn't really watch what I was eating, and I didn't watch what I was eating. So what ended up happening was, yeah, I put on a lot of muscle, but I got fat quickly. Like I was hefty. So in a bid to cut down for my holiday, I went on a restricted calorie diet, and actually, my order for lunch, basically, I was on the lookout for something that was convenient, high in protein, and I could just grab and go and consume very quickly. So that meant it was a little chicken pot from M&S, the actual Biotiful yogurt, and a bowl of fruit. Now, something else I quickly want to talk about. I've already sort of alluded to it, but I do believe it's worth highlighting in its own small segment. For me, it's one of the biggest reasons for why Biotiful was so successful. And that was their ability to spot the correct trend and leverage all the breakthroughs in science and technology as and when in the right time. They were there in the right place at the right time. For me, it's a key concept and idea that I believe we should always be looking to take away and apply to our own business, but not just for our businesses now, our businesses in the future also. In fact, I'd argue the point that history has constantly shown that the companies who are leveraging trends and breakthroughs in science and technology are always the ones that grow and scale the fastest. Uber is the most classic example because without a phone that had a chip powerful enough for them to actually start developing apps on, and actually GPS put onto the phone, aka the iPhone, Uber wouldn't even have existed, let alone scale to the dizzying heights that it finds itself today. However, if there was one skill set that I truly believe is one of the biggest reasons for Biotiful's success, and it's one skill set that you need to have mastered, it's the ability to tell stories. This, in my opinion, Natasha and her team and her marketing team was probably the most impressive part of their entire growth. As I mentioned already, they were seriously up against it. This is back to the wall stuff. They were up against deeply entrenched Western beliefs on what is good food, what is a healthy lifestyle to live. And that's not an easy thing to go up against and challenge the status quo. And this is where storytelling is so powerful. It's extremely powerful. And Biotiful and Natasha and her team did a fantastic job of doing this because it wasn't just about marketing a new product. It was the foundation that challenged generationally held attitudes all across the UK. And the great thing is, there's so many different angles that they can actually lean into. First one that springs to my mind is looking at this through a sort of historical and mythical lens. And now when you do that, there's this play on some sort of lost knowledge, some lost secrets that were revered back in the day. But now they've been found again, been brought back, and now they're being shared with the West. And when you actually view the whole situation, the whole story, the whole background around Biotiful and kefir, it allows Biotiful to actually position and frame tradition as a sort of time-tested experiment over generations that's now finally merged with the modern world, modern science. Another narrative that you can actually spin from this is the idea that our body fundamentally rejects all processed foods. It doesn't seek it out. It does not align with it at all. And that instead, our body is wise. And what it does seek and what it does look out for is natural, whole foods. That is what our body connects with. And that over time, for whatever reason, through new narratives of health being spun up, we've lost that connection. And then now it's up to Biotiful to bring back kefir and mend and heal that connection. But naturally, the founder story is always the best. And trust me, this one is incredibly strong. Natasha is the perfect protagonist to actually drive the story forward, being that she's this perfect link between East and West, given her upbringing in Russia, but also her time spent living and working in the UK. Following this hero's journey narrative, our protagonist Natasha, in the ordinary world, sets off on a quest. Now, one of the main reasons why Natasha started Biotiful, and she openly talks about this quite a lot, is that she actually first started making kefir at home after looking at the list of ingredients on the back of a bottle of growing up milk, supposed to be for her newborn child. And looking at this list of ingredients, she was probably, and rightly so, just frustrated by all the absolute garbage in it. And we're talking added sugars, preservatives, stabilizers. It was just unnatural. So after experiencing this, she couldn't help but think, if only there was a clean source of nutrition she could feed her child, similar to what she had in Russia. And so she began looking everywhere in shops for kefir, but couldn't find it anywhere. It was at this point she rolled up her sleeves and went to work, traveled all the way back to Russia to learn how to make kefir. And it's here where Natasha rediscovers this ancient knowledge that has been passed down through generations and families, all the way from the Prophet Muhammad. She brought this new knowledge back to the UK along with a bag of kefir seeds and started making batches at home. Not long after, she went for it and started making batches at a small dairy in West Sussex. Now, I'm sure there was plenty of hardship and setback on the journey, working long hours on the weekend at the dairy farm, trying to perfect the product for 9 months. And remember, all of this was completely self-funded. Natasha did everything: the marketing, finance, operations, production. And now Natasha ends up going on this entire transformative journey from working in finance to founder, returning to the ordinary world, a successful businesswoman. It really was just amazing storytelling. You know, someone once told me that no one really gives a shit what you have to say unless you give them a reason to. And you do that by, one, showing how much you care, and two, breaking their beliefs. And the only way you can actually do that is by what? Powerful storytelling. So overall, actually researching and learning more about Biotiful has really been eye-opening for me, because it's really allowed me to appreciate and learn some more about what I believe are now some of the fundamental aspects of growing a business. Both Natasha and the fantastic team she put around her, they were masters of storytelling, and they were futurists who lived in the future in order to think long-term with the vision for the company.